Well, it's been a while.
It has been a while.
Last time I worked with you, I think you were based up in New York. You had some different people on your team. We had a lot of fun. So people have been connecting deeply with our guests. Bring yourself into the room a little bit here. What's Simon been working on? Are you living in LA now? Your life has changed a little bit.
My life has changed a lot, actually. So my sister and her family live in Los Angeles, and so when COVID struck, I thought, you know what? I'll go to LA for a couple months while COVID, blows over. That'll be nice. The weather's nice, and I'm still here. So I guess I live in Los Angeles now. I'm a great believer that the world is made up of balance. And for anything good that happens to us, it comes at a cost, always. And I like to consider what that cost is. But when something bad happens to us, there's also opportunity or lessons or something. And I sort of made a practice out of always trying to keep the balance. So I don't take good for granted, and bad, I always try and get something out of it. And COVID was such a shock to the system. The opportunity was huge. I mean, total reinvention if you wanted it. And for our business, it was total reinvention. But for me, it gave them an opportunity to sit and breathe. And I think many people in this room can relate, that we're on a hamster wheel for our careers. And we think that we're setting the speed of the hamster wheel by how fast we're running. And the hard lesson that I learned is I'm just running to keep up. And for a period of time, COVID stopped the wheel. And I got off. And then I got to look around and say, do I want to get back on that wheel, or is there something else I want to do? And so there was a ton of introspection. I've grown up a lot, to be honest. And I worked hard. I had that time to do it. And I also decided how I want to spend the rest of my life. I'm very, very, very proud of the work that I have done and the work that I do, and spreading a message and challenging traditional notions of how business works and how we can change that. My nemesis, Jack Welch. But the question is like I'm proud of that, and it has its own momentum. Mm-hmm. And I'm a great believer in measuring success not by hitting absolutes, but by counting momentum. And that's for us individually as well as businesses. And then it's much easier to maintain momentum.
And so when I first started hearing about, people are like, you gotta, as we're getting into this purpose thing and why you've got to meet Simon, he's incredible, blah, blah, blah. And it was, you'd written these books. My favorite was Leaders Eat Last. Just the concept alone is so true. Starting with why there was this meteoric rise where everybody watched a 15-minute video.
Yeah.
Just a simple, was it a TED Talk somewhere?
Yeah.
Probably? And did you know that, did you sense that was going to happen, or were you just kind of out riffing on your thoughts and something took hold?
I'd been giving that talk for, you got a little inside baseball now. Okay, so I'd been giving that talk for 3 years, and the shortest I ever did it was an hour. And
wow.
When they invited me to do the TEDx, I was like, yeah, fine. They're like, do you want to do a rehearsal? I'm like, no, it's the same content I've been doing for 3 years. Like, I know it. And like the night before, I was like, I've never done it in 18 minutes. And like, then the panic.
Wow.
But I figured I'll just leave some stuff out.
And you just had a piece of paper and a couple of circles.
So it was funny because right before I was supposed to speak, and it was only like 50 people in the room, right before I was supposed to speak, I realized that my old introduction for an hour-long talk was like 8 minutes. I'm like, I can't use up 8 minutes on an introduction. So I like went for a walk around the block to try and come up with a new introduction that was just like 30 seconds. But yeah, I didn't expect it to do what it did. Of course not. I mean, it's like winning the lottery, I never expected it to do what it did, but it makes sense to me. It's a deeply human message. I knew from the 3 years that I'd been giving that talk that people related to it. So I understand it, but I also think it was timing. Yeah. I came out at a time where TEDx was a relatively new thing and there weren't that many of them. Now there's thousands and thousands of them a year. I don't know if it would pop the same way today as it did all those years ago. I think I got lucky with the timing.
Leaders Eat Last, start with why, and then and then that sort of created this whole thing. And I've always felt like, on the one hand, you kind of access revolutionary thoughts, and I think you believe that America is a great place, but it needs to change. Corporate America, capitalism is a great thing, but it's not gonna make it in its current if it keeps going. The Jack Welch kind of mentality that win at all costs. And so since then, you've been working on a new body of work, The Infinite Game, and more recently, how do you summarize sort of where your thinking has evolved from purpose to more than that?
Yeah, I mean, my work is it's all a journey, so it all builds upon the last thing. Like, they stand alone as separate ideas, but it all builds upon the last thing, of course. The Infinite Game, I'm obsessed with it, to be honest. The original definition was proposed by a theologian and philosopher by the name of Dr. James Carse back in the mid-'80s. And I'd known about Carse's work for years, and I had read his original book, Finite and Infinite Games. And it's a kooky little philosophy book. But I realize it's starting to impact the way I thought. And for those who don't know, I'll give you the quick synopsis. So there are two types of games. There are finite games and there are infinite games. A finite game is defined as known players, fixed rules, and an agreed-upon objective. Football, baseball. There's always a beginning, middle, and an end. And if there's a winner, necessarily they have to be losers, right? Then you have infinite games. Infinite games are defined as known and unknown players, which means anyone can join at any time and you don't necessarily know who all the other players are. The rules are changeable, which means every player can play however they want. And the objective is to perpetuate the game, to stay in the game as long as possible. We're players in infinite games every day of our lives, whether we know it or not. Like, you're not going to win your marriage, right? You can't be number one in your marriage. Number two, for sure, but never number one. Nobody wins education. You can come in first for the finite amount of time you're at school, where we agreed upon the time frame and we agreed upon the metrics called grades, but nobody wins education, nobody wins healthcare, nobody wins career, and definitely no company is declared the winner of business, right? But if you listen to the language of so many leaders, it becomes abundantly clear that they don't know the game they're playing in. They talk about being number one, being the best, or beating their competition. Based on what? Based upon what agreed upon metrics, objectives, or timeframes. And this is a problem, because when we play with a finite mindset in an infinite game, when you play to win in a game that has no finish line, there are predictable and consistent outcomes, the big ones being the decline of trust, the decline of cooperation, and the decline of innovation. Like when Circuit City went bankrupt, Best Buy didn't win anything, right? All that happened is they lost one of the players, other players fill the gap, and they have to learn to reinvent because now Amazon's a new competitor, and now they have to completely change the way they want to play. Otherwise, they'll fall out of the game as well. And so this was profound for me, because when I started to apply that definition to my work and the business world, it became abundantly clear that starting in the late 70s, early 80s, our nation was the way we distorted capitalism. Like Adam Smith capitalism that made this country great and made it as wealthy as it is, and gave it such remarkable influence. And we're the most innovative nation in the world. Almost every great invention that has affected the planet Earth came from us, right? Which is astonishing. Modern inventions. Clearly, mathematics wasn't ours. But you start to see the dismantling of that infinite mindset that Adam Smith and Thomas Jefferson and all these folks embraced. Thomas Jefferson was a huge fan of Adam Smith's. And you start to see this more finite-mindedness, the rise of shareholder supremacy, where a disinterested external constituency becomes more important than a customer or an employee, which is like a coach of a team trying to make a great team by taking advice from fair-weathered fans and ignoring the needs of players. I mean, that's kind of what that is. You see the rise of things like using mass layoffs on a regular basis to balance the books. We were profitable, just not as profitable as we had promised, so all of you lose your jobs. Oh no, you've been great. It's not a meritocracy, you know? And you start to see the steady drumbeat over the course of the past 30, 40 years where we have actually been dismantling the awesomeness of American capitalism. I'm a die-hard capitalist, just not the form that we've created. Right. And it's very, very recent. It's very, very modern. And Jack Welch is the poster child for that form of capitalism. You know, Gordon Gekko, but he's a fictional character. And we've seen the result, which we've seen massive backlash. We've seen the decline in the lifespan of companies, right? It went from 60 years to now, which is 17 years, the average lifespan of a company. We've seen declines in innovation. We've seen disengagement from employees. We've seen lack of loyalty from employees. We complain about young people that, they're not loyal and they bounce from job. Well, think how they grew up. They watched their parents get laid off through no fault of their own because of this insane system. So why should they be loyal? I don't blame them. And we see the results. We see increases in stress and disengagement and malaise and depression and anxiety. These are all related. The Great Resignation, which if we want to go down that rabbit hole, all related. So I think there's a massive opportunity for forward-thinking companies because GE and those companies had massive influence in the direction of capitalism. Because they were so wealthy, others just copied them, right? Not because they were good, but because they had short-term success. Others went, well, it's working for them. And because the whole system's in upheaval, there's massive opportunity for a new company. There is no heir apparent to redirect what the future of American business will look like. In addition, GE was the leadership factory for that model. If you had GE on your resume, you could go anywhere, and you were a senior executive, you can be our CEO, right? It's the number of CEOs that came from GE was disproportionate. There has been no heir apparent for the modern leadership factory for what capitalism should be, for infinite-minded capitalism. So I think the opportunity is available to this company.
I like to think that it's in this room. Something a lot of people don't know is Jack Welch put on a full court press to buy this company. He put on his A game, and my grandmother, her sister, didn't want to, and they didn't really know why. It just didn't quite feel right. It was a ton of money. Everything Daddy did, so to speak, was coming to fruition. And man, what are we going to do in this new world? But there's this picture where Jack Welch is like giving a big thumbs up, like with my grandmother, and she had a look about her, and she was looking at him sideways, and it was a very prophetic, because I think he thought everything was done, but she was like, this isn't.
I would love a copy of that picture.
I'll get it for you. It's a great picture, and her facial expression reflects what you're saying about that mindset.
Yeah.
But it was this, I think what she said was, in her mind, and she may have told me this, Daddy wouldn't have liked this.
Yeah.
It was never about money. It was about employees, and it was about thanking people that got us here, and it was about a relationship between, yes, we own this thing, but we owe something to, the folks we started it with, and that's always been the mindset. And so we're here. We are now in this thing, and I'm just kind of thinking out loud here, but some of the things that are frustrating all of us, frustrating me, is like this sense of control and facts and what we know to be true is like challenged. And it's so weird to think that facts are not facts. Or what is a fact? I actually got into this conversation, unfortunately, over Thanksgiving with my mother-in-law. She'd had a couple glasses of wine, but I said, you have to admit that you can't, you have to admit that a fact exists. And she said, you'll have to prove that to me. I'm like, okay, I can't do this. This is beyond my pay grade. But, so vaccines.
Yeah.
This horrible thing is happening. We're all out of the office. We can't come back to the office without vaccines. I mean, you can't have like some people that are mysteriously not vaccinated, some people that are, and you wear like a bracelet and I'm good and they're not. You just can't. It's kind of like smoking. If you're walking around secondhand smoking, you're getting other people sick.
Yeah.
It's just not fair. Yes, it's your right to do so, I guess, as a human, but it's not your right, like sort of in the workplace. So we have to do this thing. So are we all agreed? Sure. Now you start to tell employees, there's a large group of people that are like, I'll be damned. How dare you? This company is all about empowerment. It's all about telling me it's my choice. You're giving me the power to do what I want. Now you're telling me I have to do this or I'm fired.
Yeah.
We're like, you're not fired. It's just we hope you agree that the world will never get back to normal unless all of us jump in and be safe. And more importantly, it's not about you. It's about spreading it to others. And you have to stop it. You have to stop it with your body. And there's no reason to believe it's dangerous, all that. And but what about VAERS? Have you read VAERS? I went on there and, there's somebody who said they took it and they died the next day. And I'm like, well, if they died the next day, how would they put that on VAERS? VAERS is an open mic. There's no scientific validity to it, but everybody has their version.
Yeah.
Everybody's arguing. There's no way to win the argument.
Yeah.
So who's in control? Are we able to tell employees to come to work? Are we asking them, it's a frustrating time. And every person in this room has been through the frustration.
Yeah. There was a cartoon I think it was a New Yorker cartoon, and a flight attendant on the plane said, is there a doctor or anyone who's done their own research aboard, please? I thought it was, maybe it was just me. Okay, let's jump into this. There's a lot to unpack there, obviously. There are two thoughts that come to mind. One is about control, and one is about, and it goes back to finite-mindedness, which is our nation over-indexed on finite-mindedness for 30, 40 years, and it affected everything. It affected business, affected politics, it affected military, it affected every aspect of life.
Did it change with Vietnam? You mentioned that a long time ago before you wrote the book. It was like we invaded, we were going to win and beat them.
We had completely the wrong mindset.
They weren't trying to beat us. They just wanted to live past us. And there was no city to take over. You couldn't go to Berlin and have this all be over. Ho Chi Minh City was empty.
So what Alex is referring to in the book, I have this opening story to make the case, which is in Vietnam, over the course of that 10-year war, we won almost every major battle we fought. Most people don't know that. We actually won most of the battles we fought, most of the major battles. Over the course of those 10 years, we lost 58,000 soldiers and Marines. They lost over 3 million. And so it raises the very interesting question, if you win the battles and you decimate your enemy, how do you lose the war? And so that's one of the things that got me interested in this definition of the infinite game, which is clearly there's more than one definition of winning and losing. And in this case, America was fighting with a finite mindset in an infinite game. They were fighting to win, and the Vietnamese were fighting to survive. And they would fight to the very last person if necessary. And a finite player who's playing with a finite mindset in an infinite game, where the other players are playing with the right mindset, will always find themselves in quagmire, always. And the resource, the currency of an infinite game is will and resources. Resources, obvious, in business it's money. In war it's money too. But there's will of the people. Remember, we left Vietnam because of the will of the people back home.
Yep.
And will is one of those things that's very often forgotten. Companies think they're strong when they're rich. Enron was rich. GE was rich. GE is a shadow of its former self, But what was the will of the people? When the foundation shook, did they abandon ship for themselves, or did they hunker down and come together? And our nation, because of this obsession with finite-mindedness for the past 30, 40 years, which means, a couple of generations were raised with that mentality, and they were told that you will excel at work and in your career if you do this. And now they're the senior executives.
Operating under that
mentality.
Under that training.
So our nation we over-indexed rugged individualism, and we forgot cooperation. There's an entire section in the bookshop called self-help, an industry, by the way, that was invented in the 1970s. There's an entire section of the bookshop called self-help, and there's no section in the bookshop called help others. In politics, compromise has become a dirty word. And the reality, if you are married, or if you have a relationship, good luck with trying to always be right. Like compromises, listening, give and take, that's part of the game for success. Mm-hmm. And business is a community, a company is a tribe, and sometimes things will go exactly your way, and sometimes they don't. But there has to be this general feeling that the company cares about me as a human being, that I'm seen, that I'm heard, that I'm understood, that I believe in the vision, that I want to advance the culture, and I believe, and I fit the value set, and the value set fits me, and I feel like this is part of my personal identity working here. Like when I say the company's name and I say my name, they feel that it feels right. And And we all know that within those relationships, that there's give and take from management all the way on down. And this goes back into control, which is we are happy to give up control when we feel that there is trust first. And I'll give you an extreme example. So I had a conversation with a Marine officer, and he was talking about, because the Marines are pretty amazing as a culture. They're pretty dynamic. They believe in semper gumby, always flexible. There we got a Marine in the audience. So they believe in semper gumby, and they encourage creativity. They encourage decision-making at the front lines. They're very good at building trust, and it's a values-based organization, right? They instill the values in their Marines. And all of that trust and all of that flexibility builds to something, which is in a high-stress situation, combat, it is all command and control. The officer says, you do that, and the Marine just does it. There is no question asked, and there's no pushback. This is not the time for, well, I'd like to share my ideas about what you've proposed.
I think I'm laying low right now.
Right. It doesn't work that way. And the reason is because in high stress, we need command and control. It's actually very, very important. But it's done so with the absolute undying belief that you're making decisions with what you believe is the best interest of the organization, the mission, whatever it is. And I accept that sometimes you'll make mistakes, and that, in the case of combat, could cost people's lives, and I accept that because I believe that you still have the best interests of this organization more than yourself. You're not sending me to harm's way. You're not leveraging the trust and the command for personal gain. You're doing it for the gain of us. And that is exactly the same in a well-run organization, which is in good times, we share the wealth. We don't hoard the wealth. In good times, we save money. It's amazing to me how many companies give away all the money in good times. Save that, because not all times are good.
Right.
Huge amounts of savings as well. Reinvestment. Ignoring shareholders' short-term desires. I have no desire to make a 27-year-old analyst rich and meet his financial goals. We have ours first. I don't know if you know Gary Ridge, the CEO of WD-40. He had an uncomfortable analyst call, not for him, but for his analysts. One of his quarterly calls, the analyst said to him, "You've missed your numbers." And Gary responded, "No, I missed your numbers. My numbers are fine." But in a company, especially in a high-stress situation, of which COVID is one of them, and there is an element of, I'm going to do this. And you can't maintain command and control for long periods of time, because then you break trust. It's episodic. And it's usually under high stress, because that's the system. And you've spent years building up the trust. And if people don't trust, then it just raises questions. Did they not fit our values? Maybe we accidentally hired people that don't belong here. So, okay, that's good to know. Or maybe I need some more leadership training at my middle management levels because it's breaking, whatever it is. Or maybe senior management needs to take a look at, have we been good at communicating? Or, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Is it circumstantial? Is it situational? It's complicated. It's messy. And the best companies are not perfect. They're constantly improving. Everything they're doing is constant improvement. Like the best people aren't perfect, but they're in constant growth mode. It's exactly the same thing. And then the elements of control also, which you touched upon. And I'm fascinated by this element of control.
Can I just sort of talk a little bit
Interrupt
about
me all the time,
one of the ways
I'm like a wind-up toy. I'll just keep going.
Yeah, one of the ways I think about control is, so we used to have, you'd have a job description, and somebody would show up and say, I like that role, here's my resume, it fits together, and we say, okay, we'll pay you X, and hopefully you'll do these, these things, and love to have a great career and all that, and you come into the office, we see you, you kind of do, you do these things, it's an expectation. So now you've said yes, COVID happens, and now we're on the other side of that, and we've told you to leave. We sort of expected that one day this would end. I mean, I remember putting out a video that said this might last till the end of the month.
Right.
I think it was March, April. This might last.
This could go through the summer.
This could go to Labor Day. Could go to December. We might go into this.
I was the outlier, by the way. I predicted the end of the summer.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. That was the outlier. And then it just kept going, and now it's gone on so long that we don't really know what lies on the other side. And so I had this extraordinary conversation. It was just it was the first one I had. It wasn't that extraordinary. It was just the first time I experienced it. But I was, I used to do lunch. I'd go down to the cafeteria when we see people, and I'd sit down with somebody at lunch and just chat and, how are you and all that. So I was missing that. I was recreating it on Zoom. So, just to pick so-and-so in the IT department or so-and-so in sales and just have a Zoom call. It's not quite the same, but, I was like, so how are you doing? I'm so excited. It looks like with the vaccines and everything, we'll be coming back. And without thinking that he was saying anything that was like concerning to me, he was like, well, I've moved down to St. Pete. And I was like, St. Pete, like St. Petersburg, Florida? And he works in the building with me. I mean, I see him all the time. And
not in St. Petersburg.
No, yeah. I mean, up in Dunwoody. And I was like, so that's amazing. So are you, do you live there now? Or are you coming back here? He said, oh yeah, I'll manage my time, of course. But we have never been happy. We just took the plunge. My whole family, and he was just like so thrilled with his life. And I'm like, I'm so happy for you, but I'm like, at scale, I don't know what this means. Yeah. We have a campus with like 8,000 people on it. We've never, when we did dress code, we used to dress in suits. I mean, come into work in a suit, and then it was business casual. What does business casual mean? Can you wear jeans? What if they're ripped? What if they're frayed? What if you could see your underwear underneath? And there was all these like, what if? And I think Goldman Sachs had a long book, or Morgan Stanley had a long book. It was like 70 pages long of all the exceptions, flesh-colored tights, and it was like got really weird. JP Morgan said dress appropriately.
Right.
And I was like, I feel kind of like dress appropriately. If you look weird, your boss should just tell you, and it shouldn't be like we're going to get sued moment. I feel like, this is the same thing. It's like, work appropriately, but I hope we can all agree that life is a live event. There's nothing like being here with our colleagues. There's nothing like, a game, a live, basketball or something is not the same on Nintendo. I mean, It's cool, but it's not, you just don't get that same thing. So we want people to come back together. We want them to use their best judgment, but we don't know if they will. And it all just gets to control. At some point, you're like, listen, you got to be in more than half your time. It has to be the exception, not the not the rule, not the exception, or kind of thing. But you can't really do that because we're in a weird place. And that translates to lots of different parts of our life.
Company Barry Waymiller calls it responsible freedom. Companies say, we love to give our people freedom, and they say we give our people responsible freedom. And I love the word that they add. I love the way that they add responsible before freedom. It doesn't mean you can do whatever you want. It means that, you can't just blow a budget for someone's birthday, we act responsibly. What's responsible? I think most people know what that line is, and sometimes there's block and tackles and corrections, as you said. But I think one of the things we're seeing, is there's been a general feeling in the United States of lack of control. And control and the feeling of control is a remarkable thing in how it affects human beings. There were these studies done in the 1970s in the UK called the Whitehall studies. And these social scientists wanted to understand this thing that they labeled executive stress syndrome, right? Which the assumption was the more senior you get, the more responsibility you have, the more impact your decisions can make, the more stress that puts upon you. So they did the study in government, in Whitehall, because they could control for variances in healthcare, because everybody got the same. And here's what they discovered. The more senior you get, your stress goes down. Yes, you have more responsibility. Yes, the stakes are higher, but you also have more agency. You get to decide how to spend your day. You get to have more control over how you solve a problem. And when you're in the most junior position, you have the least amount of agency because somebody tells you what to do and you're going to do it this way, and there is no creativity and there is no variability. And it's the lack of control that actually increases diabetes, heart disease, and some cancers, right?
I always think it's amazing when you ask for a meeting with somebody, their immediate assumption if they don't know you and they're further
Right.
down in the organization as they're getting fired.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, no, I'm giving you a bonus. I mean, I just want to, you know, they're like, oh God, thank God, I thought you were going to fire me. Like, why would I fire you? That's
but you're raising
that feeling of a lack of control.
But you're touching upon, I think, a phenomenon that has happened, again, I blame the past 30, 40 years, where, you know, people would give their entire lives to a company and then get the proverbial gold watch. There's an entire generation that when we talk about the gold watch, they don't know what we're talking about because this doesn't exist anymore. And if you think about it, and again, because of the commonality, the frequency of the use of layoffs as a tool, right? We all, for those who saw the Better.com video, I don't know if you saw it, it was embarrassing. You know, the CEO made a video that he played to employees that over Zoom.
So what, he fired 900 people?
900 people with a video saying, if you're unlucky enough to be seeing this video, effective immediately.
You're terminated at...
Effective immediately, you know, 2 weeks before Christmas. And when the CFO was interviewed about it, he said, well, we need to, and I love this terminology, we need to fortress the balance sheet. Like, this is why we should not let CFOs, like, talk to the public.
Oh, Pearlie! Our CFO is a wonderful man. Give it up for Pearlie. We love you, man.
It's very rare. It must be great here because CFOs never get that kind of applause. It's really wonderful. But the point is what he amplified is that if you have your own business, if you're a small business owner, you know you're going to go out of business months before. Like, no small business owner goes to work one day thinking everything's fine, then the next day there's nothing. Right. It just doesn't exist. But we now live in a society where having a stable job with benefits could end tomorrow. Effective immediately is what they were told. Not a meritocracy, no fault of my own, the company's doing well. And so if you think about how twisted that is, that a quote-unquote stable job is actually not stable at all, and that stress sits with every single employee. You said we need to have a meeting, and fear is the first reaction, says something not necessarily about the company, but it says something about business and the way business and corporate America is viewed. And when we don't feel like we have control, it manifests in crazy ways. Our health is one of them. But when we don't feel like we have control, we look to exert it in strange ways. So companies that have an excessive amount of office politics. So I'll give you a real life example. This is a true story. There was the person was either an intern or entry level, I can't remember, but it was beginning of their career. And they had 11 interviews. Why an intern needs 11 interviews, there's a different conversation. But they had 11 interviews, including many senior management. And this is a big company. This is thousands of employees. And then finally, they all loved the person. They all loved the candidate. And then the CEO interviewed them. And the CEO decided, I don't like him, and the kid didn't get the job. That means 11 people were told, your opinion actually doesn't matter. And so this company was fraught with politics. Because when I can't even decide, as a senior executive, to hire a frickin' intern, I'm going to look to exert control any stupid little way I can, because I gotta feel like I have control. January 6th is a lot of people who felt out of control. I read an article that a disproportionately high percentage of that population who invaded the Capitol that day were either currently struggling with or have dealt with significant financial trouble, whether it's debt or personal bankruptcy, disproportionately high, right? And coming from a population that felt disenfranchised by politics for the past 20 years. And so there's looking to exert control in crazy ways, right? And so the question is what can we as companies do to make people feel and have agency? One of the ways is accountability, right? Which is, you have responsibility for this project. If it goes right, I will give you credit. And if it goes wrong, I will stand by you and support you as you try and mend it, right? I'm not swooping in, right? I'm not swooping in, and I'm not taking the credit. And we give people control. And this is a huge mistake that's made in leadership all the time, which is all the authority sits at the top. All the information sits at the bottom. This is David Marquet's work. And many falsely believe we have to push information up so that decisions can be made, which is inefficient, and it never really happens. But the real responsibility is to push authority down. And I'll go back to the Marine Corps. You know, commander's intent. The company wants to go in this direction, and we would like to accomplish this. How would you like to solve that problem? Like customer service. I mean, take something really basic, you know, which I find fascinating. The number of senior executives who sit in a room to fix a customer service problem. And yet, why are there no frontline employees in that room? Because there's one group of people who knows much more about customer service than anybody else in the company, and it's the people who talk to the customers every day.
We're going to get into some questions. Because I have the mic, I'll ask the first question as a member of the audience. But this is one of those ones that is uncomfortable. But power, control, has got a new word in the last 2 years, 18 months that I had not heard prior to that. But it's not control; it's privilege.
Yep.
So you have come, I'm among the most privileged people ever that lived on Earth, and I know that, and it's made me think about that very differently. But, you've seen this event of privilege happen. I've sat there. We did this on Zoom. It was so weird that we couldn't do this in person, but the social events were happening, and we realized we need to listen. We need to talk. There's something going on here. And it's not something going on, it's just there's been a lot that has not been said that's always been there.
Yep.
And I'm going to hear it now. and there's this discontent with, I don't like the fact, or it's unfair that you're in control.
Yep.
It's not just me. I mean, it's all of it.
Yep.
Basically, everyone in this room is privileged above the average person in the world.
Yep.
What is privilege? What does that whole thing mean to you? And how do we deal with it? I mean, you kind of can't help it. You're in the role. You can't just not be in the role anymore and do your job. But
so what it goes back to feelings of control, of course, and what it requires is empathy. The correct response is empathy, right? And the sort of excessive apologizing, like to apologize for how you were born, is a strange reaction. But the most important thing, I think, is empathy, to try to understand, to try and relate. And we saw this happen. It didn't happen, unfortunately, because we don't teach the skills. We don't teach active listening. We don't teach executives or any employee in our company how to make someone else feel heard, feel understood, feel seen, which is where it starts. And if that can happen, then all kinds of trust builds and all the other things start to break away. So, for example, after the murder of George Floyd, I was astonished at the number of people in a leadership position, regardless of mid-ranking on up, did nothing.
you mean in the police force or just in
in companies, people who lead teams. That after the murder of George Floyd, they didn't talk to their teams. They just did nothing. And it's not because they're bad people. It's because they didn't have the skills. They didn't know how to have an uncomfortable or difficult conversation. And so they chose nothing, which makes things worse. And this is just a skill we can teach people. And here's how to have a difficult conversation. You bring your team together and say, we need to have an uncomfortable conversation about race and our company. And I'm nervous to have this conversation because I'm afraid that I'm going to bumble something. I'm afraid that I'm going to say something that will trigger somebody. And I'm afraid I'm going to say something, or someone will say something, that may agitate and make this worse. But I think it's more important that we have this conversation than my fear of doing this perfectly. And that's how you start a difficult conversation. And it is difficult, but it is necessary. And those conversations are not happening. And again, not because of bad people, it's because people are afraid and they don't have the skills to start those conversations. And it is the responsibility of leaders, because that's why we call you leader. We call you leader because you go first. Not because you're in charge, but because you go first. First to the unknown, first to the difficult, first to the dangerous. And it is our responsibility as as a corporation to empower and educate our leaders to do the things that they need to do with their teams.
Yep.
And of course, up on high, same thing. So I think that's where it begins. There's a tremendous lack of listening in our nation.
Yeah.
And a lot of talking, a lot of yelling, very little listening.
And hopefully, get past the Omicron wave, which I heard this morning in Europe is horrible, and hopefully it will be less symptomatic than before, and we'll be able to get physically back together, which will make that better. But if we could possibly bring the lights up just a smidge, and if there's we've got 15 or so minutes, but we'll take as much time as we want. There's a hand here in the middle.
Good morning. Thank you so much for being here today, and thank you, Alex, for bringing Mr. Sinek. Sinek, sorry. I'm struck by this last exchange compared to the earlier discussion of command and control.
Yeah.
And Alex's point about people getting vaccinated, right? That seems like an opportunity for command and control, but there's the need for empathy and listening.
100%.
How do you balance that?
So the decisions we make are not disconnected from our need to be human, right? Which is, it is amazing. So listening is a trust-building exercise, right? If you're in take it down to a personal relationship. If you've ever had a romantic relationship, it's a loved one, right? Making someone feel heard doesn't mean you're wrong. Saying sorry doesn't mean you're wrong. It just means you take accountability for your actions. And I think it is important that when somebody objects to vaccination, that we don't demonize or villainize them, but we attempt to hear them, make them feel heard. Doesn't mean we have to agree, but they have to feel heard. And, listening is not hearing the words. It's making the other person feel that they were heard. We don't get to decide when hearing has happened, when listening has happened. They do. And by the way, it's not 100% successful either, because some people are just hell-bent on, but that's a minority. And so I think the exercise is sitting down with people and say, tell me what you're going through. Tell me what you're afraid of. I want to understand, because we're trying to make everyone safe. I want to hear what your thing is. And let them tell their story. We have no answers. We're not there to object. We're not there to react. We're not there to fix or tell them that they're wrong. Women are better than this than men. And I think that has to happen. And it can happen simultaneously. They are not mutually exclusive. I'll give you one example, which is I have a friend who refused to get vaccinated. And I sat down with her and I said, tell me your reasoning, right? She goes, well, this new technology, we don't know, it hasn't been out long enough. We don't know. So what I hear is fear of the unknown, okay? I go on, and I let her talk and say her thing and explain all the things, and I simply said, so you're afraid of the mRNA technology, right? Yes. I don't want them screwing with my DNA. I said, well, just so you know, it's 20-year-old technology, but then I found something I could agree with her. But you're right. It is the first time it's been commercialized. You're absolutely right. This is the first time we've put it in the market. So I affirmed her fear. And then I said, do you get flu shots every year? She goes, I do. I said, okay, Johnson & Johnson is a good old-fashioned flu shot. It's a different technology. It's not mRNA. So you're 100% right. If you're afraid of the new technology, don't get Moderna or Pfizer. But Johnson & Johnson it's just like a flu shot. It's the same old tech. And she went, it is? I went, it is. She went and got a Moderna shot. Because she just wanted to be heard, because most of her friends, when she said, I'm not getting vaccinated, yelled at her, told her she was stupid, told her she's an idiot, told her she's letting her friends down, told her she's making other people sick, told her she's a risk to society. That doesn't make somebody's mind open up. All I did was let her feel heard. I think we do. We have to do that. We have to do that.
We did an interview recently with a doctor, head of epidemiology at Emory we're, I think, sending out today or tomorrow, but he said calling it a mandate has a much different effect on an organization than calling it a requirement, an office requirement, and it's just how it is taken, and it can be taken offensively. Other questions? Percy, got one here? Got one back there? Hey.
First of all, shout out to all of our leaders in this room who did an incredible job managing through and are doing an incredible job managing through the mandate. You guys are amazing. But Simon, so much of what you said really resonated with me as somebody who previously worked at a company where at one point they implemented a GE performance forced ranking system that was very destructive in the end. What are your thoughts on income inequality and how to address, the gap in pay that we see that has just exploded between CEOs and median income?
Yeah.
Because I think that is part of this finite world.
Yeah, you're 100% right. And I've forgotten the exact numbers, but I'm not far off. But over the past, whatever it is, 30, 40 years, the average CEO pay has increased something like 750%, and the average employee has increased about 11%. I mean, so it's disproportionate. And nobody minds that senior executives will be better compensated, but they want to share in the wealth that they're helping to generate. And income inequality is one of those things that makes people feel out of control because they don't get to determine their own income, and so again, it's not that somebody makes more that's the issue. It's are you letting me join in the success that I am helping to produce? Do I have opportunities to increase my own wealth like you do? You hit certain numbers, for example. So I think income inequality in this country, I think it's only the tip of the iceberg, and I think it is one of those things that has caused a group of people to feel disenfranchised in the nation, and their voices have largely been ignored for 30 years, and it's coming to roost. And by the way, you can look through history. Whenever the delta between the haves and the have-nots grows too big, usually there's a revolution.
I don't know if anybody, or I don't know if you're a storyteller. Have you listened to any of Hardcore History? Dan Carlin, it's this podcast. It is unbelievable, but he does a lot of series on the Romans and the lessons learned and the Gauls and the Celts and all this stuff, and that hierarchy. And it brings down empires.
It does, and unfortunately, there's a lot of similarities between what America's going through right now and the Roman Empire. But that's a different conversation.
Percy?
Yeah. Simon, thanks for being with us today. So
Thank you.
I love the comment about balance. So how do we fix the political landscape?
Simple stuff. Thank you.
Change starts at home. Saying that the politicians have to change, like everybody knows that, but they're not going to because they have become more finite-minded, which is an election is a finite game. There's a beginning, middle, and end, and there's a winner and there's a loser. But the minute you win your election, now governance is an infinite game. But the problem is they don't make that conversion. And it used to be, and I talked to some congressmen about this, some old-timers, and they were explaining to me that back in the day, 80% of the negotiations would be done behind closed doors, and the last 20% was for the cameras. And now it's 100% for the cameras. And back in the day, the goal was that each party could go back to their constituents and say, we won. And they could both go back and say, we got what we wanted, and appease their constituents. Now it's not enough to say we won, we also have to demonstrate that the other side lost, which is a finite mindset in an infinite game, which decreases trust, cooperation. But if we want to go backwards and look to the root, I think that Contract for America back in the day, one of the components of that, and this is not political, I don't care about the politics of it, but there was a component of it that said to congressmen, don't move your family to Washington when you get elected. Stay home in your constituency. So now what happens is you have congressmen come to work for about 3 days in Washington, and then fly home, and they're not meeting their constituents, they're fundraising for 5 days a week, right? But the problem is, back in the day, they fought, and they disagreed, and they hated each other, but they sat in the bleachers together to watch their kids play baseball, and they went to the same PTA meetings, and they were friends, and they socialized, and it's really easy to compromise with a friend. And you could sit back and be like, I can't do that, you know I can't do that, you know? But now there's no friendships, they don't know each other. They sleep on their couches at work, and they only know the people they hang out with, which is their own party. We don't want to go into gerrymandering as well. You know, we used to live in a world where, you know, we picked our electors, now our electors pick us. And so they don't have blended districts anymore, where they have to have a point of view that appeals to both sides. Both sides have gerrymandered to the point that you only have to appeal to your own. So they've both gone more extremist. But to answer your question directly, without, you know, I'm sorry, I had to go on a little diatribe, but to answer your question more directly, I think our politicians are a reflection of us. I think we get what we deserve. And none of this is a surprise, and none of this is an anomaly. It's all been a steady drumbeat. If we just go back 40 years, you can see the steady drumbeat to Republican and Democrat, the steady drumbeat towards more and more finite, and it's just come to a head these days. It's been getting worse for decades, since basically the fall of the Berlin Wall. You can go back to about 1989, where it started. And we are the ones who are complaining. They need to compromise. They need to listen. They need to work across the aisle. They need to stop being less judgmental. Well, hello. We need to compromise. We need to listen. We need to work across the aisle. We need to be less judgmental. It's us. And I think change always starts at home.
I've recently, we have a PAC, and we try to find moderate, nice people that are willing to have conversations on both sides. And Senator Masto, chair of the Senate campaign committee, was with us in our office, and I asked this question, and she said, "There's what you don't see is that we actually do have a lot of bipartisan work going on. I mean, to get anything done, we get into the room, we get both sides of the committee, we talk, we see if we can go find some agreeing votes. We come back together and say the problems we're facing, but the goal is to do the thing, to accomplish something. There's these big iconic, votes on, voting or reconciliation or whatever that, come hell or high water, we won't. But those are just things you hear about. The things you don't hear about are just hundreds of laws that get passed all the time that we work on together. But when we go back to our constituencies, you say, I said no. And you tell your constituencies how divisive you were, and you don't buy that?
I call bullshit. Okay. I mean, that's the same, to me, that's the same party line as, well, most cops are good cops. It's like, yeah, I know that, but you have a problem. It's like, yeah, sure, you're very good at getting the mundane stuff done. Kudos? That sounds like table stakes to me. It's like, it's the difficult stuff the stuff that has to get done. Mm-hmm. Like the fact that we even came to another brink where that government could get shut down is just an embarrassment. So to me, it's a moral equivalency. It's that kind of thing. It was like, well, it's like you're looking at all the bad things. Like, well, but we do a lot of good things. It's like, oh,
yeah.
Last
time we'll give to her.
Yeah. So. I don't know.
I hear what you're saying. Her point was, though, that it's like you said, you're being you get what you deserve. They don't want to say we're playing along publicly because their voters won't vote for them because we are a divided nation and we come from different places and we don't trust the other side and so we're fighting and we like people that fight for us.
But when did compromise become dirty? Like, you cannot have a successful marriage without compromise. You cannot be a successful person unless your views change as you get older and wiser, right? It's only in politics where you have to believe the same thing for 30 years, otherwise... You're a bad person. It's only in politics where talking to the side and trying to find common ground is considered the devil's work. I call bull, and I've worked with both sides because I preach bipartisanship. I won't work with a candidate, but I'll work with parties, and I've worked with both parties, and I can tell you some funny stories. And I've had private conversations, and I'll tell you one of them. So I sat down with a congressman, just me and the congressman, no staffers around us, and I had the uncomfortable conversation, which I wouldn't have publicly with them because it's just inappropriate. And I said, you know what your problem is you're not willing to sacrifice for this country. I said, I know men and women who wear a uniform who would lay down their lives for this country. And you won't even give up your job for this country. Oh, and by the way, if you lost your election, you're going to become a lobbyist or some consultant, and you'll make more money than you've ever dreamed of. So my question is, what exactly are you losing, whether you keep your job or lose your job? The answer is nothing. Power. And, right. And, but the point is that they're in a win-win situation. I'm either powerful or I got cash. Like, that's your choice. And he looked at me and said, you're right. None of us are willing to, and this is not what our founding fathers intended. Our founding fathers intended that you would leave your law practice, you would leave your farm, you'd come and serve your nation for a few cycles, and then you go back to your career. We have professional politicians now. People who've been in office for 30 years, they actually don't know how to do anything else. Take anybody who's been doing something for 30 years and say, you're going to stop doing it. And fear is the motivation as well. Our founding fathers never wanted a class of professional politician. That was never in the design of this nation. So I think there's this is a horrible thought, but it's a thought that I've struggled with for years now, and I cannot reconcile it, which is, we lost something when the Berlin Wall came down, which is we lost an external existential threat. We always fought, we always disagreed, but at the end of the day, we could come together and say, ugh, that's not that. That threatens all of us. And so we could come together in defense of our beliefs in our nation. And when the Berlin Wall came down and we lost a perception, because it still exists, we just lost the perception of the external existential threat. What happens, it's a weird quirk of humanity, which is vision and positive stuff and all this stuff is all ethereal, but negative stuff is usually tangible. And so it's a weird quirk of humanity that I can more easily define what I stand for when I can see what I stand against. But if that thing that I stand against doesn't exist, then it's very hard for me to articulate what I stand for. And so I look for something that I'm against to help me understand what I stand for. And so if it doesn't exist outside our borders, I'm going to look inside our borders. And we start to see a massive increase of infighting inside our nation because we don't have any sense that there's something threatening us as a tribe. And
so you've got this conundrum. I don't know if there's others.
That, by the way, was also part of the Roman Empire. After Carthage was flattened, which was their Soviet Union, Rome went into steep decline because of infighting.
Yeah. So we've got this conundrum where, we have these goals, we're trying to get things done. Are you saying that we should stop thinking about our goals and think about what, if you kind of transform your mind into the infinite, are you thinking, why are we really here? Is that what we should do as leaders when you're thinking about vaccines and mandates and privilege and all these tricky things?
It's not about abandoning goals, it's contextualizing the goals. And what most businesses lack is context for the goals. So we use all the wrong analogies in business. We use war analogies, it's a launch, it's a campaign, We use sports analogies, it's fourth and goal, and like, we gotta, and they're all finite constructions. We need to start thinking of business like a lifestyle, right? Think of it more like health. Mm-hmm. Like, I want to be healthy. What does it take to be healthy? Well, you have to exercise, you have to eat right, you have to nurse your personal relationships, you have to get enough sleep. There's probably 30 other things. You can't do all of these things perfectly all the time. It's a striving. Well, what you have to do well in business. You need good product, you need good service, you need good leadership. So you can't do all those things perfectly all the time. It's a striving. And you can absolutely have arbitrary goals in that. We love a metric. Human beings love a metric. So, for example, I want to lose X amount of weight by X date. Arbitrary number, arbitrary date, which is largely how we pick financial goals. We're going to hit this goal by this date. Make it this number, and it's arbitrary. And that's fine. And so you go and you stand on the scale every morning, you're doing all the right things. We love measuring, we love counting, we love feeling the progress. And then you hit your goal on the right day and the right time, and you're ecstatic. But here's the thing. You have to keep exercising for the rest of your life. It doesn't end. And it's the same with business. You hit your goal, but the whole thing called business and all that striving and marketing, and it doesn't end. Like, you have to keep doing it. But I think it's more interesting when we miss the goal. Because if you're doing all this stuff and you stand on the scale on that day and you miss your goal, you know what happens?
You keep working out.
Nothing happens, right? And what's more important is the trend. Because you are more healthy now, you are healthier now than you were when you started. You just happened to pick the wrong date. Clearly, you're going to hit it in a month. And I think what we as companies need to start doing is, first of all, contextualizing the goal. The reason we need to hit this goal is because it helps us build towards that bigger vision.
Yep.
And when we hit it, we look at the context. Oh, do we have bad leadership that just, at the last minute, in the last quarter, had all these promotions so they could hit their numbers, but they're a terrible leader building a terrible team, and this has been their year, but we bonus that person versus the other team that's really well led, that's doing everything right, beautiful, steady growth line. They just happen to miss the number. We give them nothing, so we're accidentally incentivizing the wrong behaviors. I think we need to start looking at trend data because that's infinite mindedness. And I think we need to start contextualizing those goals. If they lack context, if it's goal for the point of goal, you're in a finite game.
I'm going to use your leadership example here. We have a finite amount of time that now is blinking red here, but I don't care because we're on a roll, So. And I saw somebody there raising their hand.
In a moment of high stress, we use command and control.
So we'll take one last question.
Yes,
sure.
Go ahead.
Hi, Simon.
Hi.
With Kendra Davis. It's actually my first forum, my first event like this at New Cox.
Sandra Davis, first forum, new to Cox, now has a mic.
First forum, new to Cox actually came from one of the companies you described, a Jack Welch type company. Big Blue Globe is a logo, whatever the case is.
Welcome to Cox.
Thank you. I am just, so taken aback by this experience as a woman and a woman of color. I'm struck by your comments on momentum versus sort of finite goals. And I think part of the reason I'm here is because of Cox's commitment to diversity, action speak, et cetera. It was really important for me as I looked to leave. In the opening, it was said that you advise Alex. And so I'm interested in how or if you're advising him on maintaining this momentum that Cox has from an action speaks perspective to make sure that, what we're seeing with, movement with women and people of color selfishly is not a finite goal that we achieve and we go back, right?
Yeah.
But that we continue with this momentum. So I'm interested in how you would advise him on
Sure.
that.
So, candidly, Alex and I haven't talked for a long time. So it's a little reunion for us, too, which is fun. but I can address it, which is when we treat DEI like a finite goal, which I think unfortunately too many companies are, here's the uncomfortable reality of all of this stuff, right? Which is to truly make improvement and fix things, or at least improve things. It's a steady, sometimes slow process. It's like rebuilding trust in a relationship. It doesn't happen with one bouquet of flowers and a really nicely written card, even if it's really heartfelt and important and necessary. It's consistency and ongoing, right? But at the same time, we need to see gestures so that we can see. Remember, we love a metric. We love to see that something's happening. But we see it all over the place. We see it in police reform. We see it in DEI. We see a lot of companies and communities doing the short-term stuff for show that may or may not be having the impact they need to have. I'm okay with the short-term stuff for show so long as the difficult, slow work is happening behind the scenes simultaneously, right? And great companies, as we said, like good people, and by the way, there's no competitors in the infinite game because you can't beat anybody. There's only other players, right? The only true competitor is yourself. How do we become a better version of ourselves today than we were yesterday? And so all of these things, George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd forced our nation to hold a mirror up to ourselves. And just to go as an aside, after Floyd was murdered, I called some of my African-American friends, and I needed advice, how to have difficult conversations. I wanted to hear how they were, And on some of the conversations, I was crying. And I asked them, there's something's happened with all of them. I said, I'm crying. How come you're not crying? And they said, because I'm exhausted. They said, this is new for you. This is not new for me. This is, I lived this life. You're just seeing it for the first time because the whole scene was captured. We've been talking about this, but usually you just see the dead body in the street and we don't see what led up to it. What made George Floyd important was the camera, that we got to see it. And for people who haven't seen that, for all the reasons, it was shocking good, And so I think that when we talk about the infinite gaming, about a constant improvement, blaming someone for something they didn't see isn't helpful. But now that they've seen it, we say, okay, let's do that work and let's go through the constant improvement. Like, what are the things that we can do inside our company so this is not for show and temporary and fashionable, but this becomes part of our growth, part of who we are. That we become more aware of these things. We have systems in place. We have different kinds of metrics. We have different kinds of incentives. We have different kinds of practices. We've implemented things like listening skills. We've implemented things like teaching anybody who gets promoted to any position of leadership to learn how to have a difficult conversation. And the reality is, if you can have a difficult conversation about race, you can have a difficult conversation about anything. Your performance is not doing so great. That's a difficult conversation. So I think this is a massive opportunity, like any learning opportunity, for personal growth. And companies go through personal growth like people go through personal growth.
And what somebody said...
Ongoing, forever, exercise, eating right. This is forever. This is forever. It's a striving, and that's what we have to remember. It's a striving.
Somebody said something that stuck with me during all this, which was diversity and inclusion. You can have as diverse of a workforce as you want. It doesn't amount to anything if you don't have an inclusive culture, and it's a mindset, and it's not a number.
And I got a bunch of phone calls right after the murder of George Floyd, and I was really annoyed by how many executives were more preoccupied with the press release than with the hard work they needed to do inside their company. I understand you got to put the press release out. I'm fine with that, but the press release should reflect the work that you're deciding to do. It shouldn't be the priority before the work you decide to do.
Yeah, I'd say everybody in this room did that, and it's a great question to end on. Gives us plenty to think about. I want to thank you for being with us. It has been too long. I do want to take your advice more, and I don't want it to be another 4 years before we see you. So thank you for joining us, and thank you for what you're doing to add goodness into the world around us.